I want to welcome everybody to our Presbyterians for Earth Care webinar this evening. My name is Mindy Heidenfelter, and I'm the coordinator for Presbyterians for Earth Care. Welcome. Our webinar tonight is Edible Landscapes and Climate Resilient Communities. And we have two fantastic presenters tonight. But first, we are going to start off with a prayer to start our program. And I'm going to read to you from a book called Earth Gospel. And it's written by put together by a member of our steering committee, Sam Hamilton Poor. So I'm going to read to you a prayer that was written by Ray Simpson with he's with the community of Aiden and Hilda. So let us pray. We give you thanks because Earth's life and fruitfulness flow from you, and all times and seasons reflect your laws. We give you thanks because you created the world in love, you redeemed the world through love, you maintain the world by your love. Help us give our love to you. Amen.
Very nice.
And so I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first speaker here. We're going to have a presentation by both of our speakers, and then we will have time at the end for any of your questions. Feel free to put them in the chat as you think of them, or wait till the end and you can ask your questions. So first, let me introduce to you Charmel Roussel. She serves on the National Steering Committee for Presbyterians for Earth Care and is also the Executive Director of Arkansas Interfaith Power and Light. Charmel serves as a ruling elder at First Presbyterian Church in Conway, Arkansas. She is co-chair of Arkansas Citizens First Congress, and this is very exciting. She is the 2024 Arkansas Peace Activist of the Year, which is an award given out by the Arkansas Coalition for Peace and Justice. And just to give you a little background on Arkansas Interfaith Power and Light, it has been awarded several environmental justice grants related to regenerative agriculture from the Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Natural Resource Conservation Services, and Climate Reality. A current Grow More Food Where People Live grant supports community gardens producing fruits and vegetables going to food distribution efforts in low wealth areas. The grant trains a multitude of urban farmers, student interns, and volunteers on the benefits of earth-friendly agriculture methods that conserve water and protect soil health. And for Arkansas IPNL, sustainable food systems are related to reducing human impact on the planet and ultimately increasing food security. And so I will pull up the slides and we will let Charmel take it from here.
Thanks, Mindy. So glad to see you all here. It's wonderful to see you all. So we're going to talk a little bit about regenerative agriculture, what that is, and what it has to do with building resilient communities, what it has to do with people who care about the environment, and how it benefits people and the planet. So next slide, please.
Sorry.
That's okay, Mindy.
There you go. Okay, got it.
So Arkansas Interfaith Power and Light is the recipient right now of a USDA NRCS grant called Grow More Food Where People Live. So at Arkansas IPL, we envision resilient communities that gather around local sustainable food systems. So we're going to go through a lot of slides here with a lot of information, but we're just going to I'm just going to comment on the highlights of each slide, but everybody who is on this webinar will get all these slides later, so you can refer back to all of the information on all the slides. And you'll also get a handout with some of the high points. What we intend to demonstrate is that, that we can do healthy feeding outreach to those who are in need. And that's a lot of places in our country today, while at the same time reducing our carbon footprint, our impact on the earth. So food systems that are better for people and better for the planet, that can be provided at your church, in a community, or even there's some things at home that you can do to reduce your impact on the planet. So next slide, please. So there's a lot of information here, but the main thing that I want you to get from this slide is that the USDA estimates that agriculture contributes 9% of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. Now, the last point on this slide is a link to an action plan that they have for climate adaptation and resilience, which you can look at later. But the USDA, recognizes that our current system of agriculture can be harmful to the planet. Next slide, please. So the EPA also recognizes this. The EPA estimates that agriculture is responsible for 10% of greenhouse gas emissions of the United States. So one says 9%, one says 10%, they're pretty close. But the main thing to remember is that both of them, the EPA and the USDA, they are partnering to advance sustainability in growing food. So next slide, please. So the EPA estimates and reports that the agriculture sector, specifically livestock cultivation, is the largest source of methane emissions in the United States. Methane is a very powerful greenhouse toxic gas. The last point on this slide is a link that you can go to later. It's just from this past July, just this past summer, and it's called Greenhouse Emissions from Cows and Livestock Are More Potent Than Cars, according to the EPA, which might be new information to some people. Next, please. So one of the resources that we like to use in our faith community is Drawdown. It's a book and also a website. It's been around for about 10 years, I think. But it has a list of 100 things that we could be doing right now to reverse global warming. 100 things. So Drawdown says if you add livestock, farming methods, deforestation, food waste, equipment, transportation, and all contributors, what we eat is the #1 cause of global warming. So on Drawdown's list of 100 things we could be doing right now to reverse global warming, the third thing, #3, is to reduce food waste. We'll talk about some ways to do that. #4 is to eat a plant-rich diet. And #11 is regenerative agriculture methods. So I don't know what you thought the #1 thing was going to be, but it's not solar panels or wind turbines. I think the #1 thing is about refrigerants. It's how we heat and cool our houses, our church buildings, and other buildings. Okay, next, please. Okay, so part of the problem, again, is eating meat-based diet. So over the decades, our plates now have a lot more meat, a lot more fresh produce, especially in the United States of America. But as time marches on, that's true more and more around the globe. As other economies ramp up, they are also eating more meat, which is not necessarily better for them and certainly not better for the planet. The last point on this slide is a video from the Washington Post that just came out like 3 days ago. And it's about what scientists are working on to reduce methane emissions from cows. So you might want to take a look at that later. Next, please. So here's another slide about the meat carbon footprint. And this one is from mygreentoddler.com. That might be on my level and some others. But this reminds us that 14% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from the meat and the dairy industry. So when it comes to personal actions, one of the things that we can do, of course, is to eat less meat. Next slide, please. So here's a picture from a fraternity at one of our gardens in Conway, Arkansas. And this garden is at a place called the Bethlehem House. So it's a organization where people who are transitioning out of homelessness are moving into the Bethlehem House and taking advantage of the services that they offer there. And one thing that they do have there on site is a commercial kitchen. So they feed a lot of meals to low wealth people in the area. And Dylan, the student on the far left, he's a member of the Honors College at the University of Central Arkansas, and his capstone project was to install garden beds right there on the property of the Bethlehem House. And so the residents there are learning to grow some of their own food, to harvest some of their own food, and then also to cook some of their own food. So meal planning and cooking is involved. But so this is all related to our emphasis on regenerative agriculture. I wanted to mention that regenerative and Genesis come from the same root word, which has to do with new life. So regenerative agriculture is about water conservation. So it's reusing water over and over again whenever possible, saving water. Soil conservation, which is about the chemical balance of your soil so that it's good for the crops. Using native plants in your landscaping whenever possible, plants that are originated from your area. Cover crops that reduce erosion. Pollinator gardens that attract bees and butterflies. Hydroponics, which is growing vegetables in water instead of soil. Vertical gardening. And I just heard something on a TED Talk today on the radio about vertical gardening and how it is becoming more popular, more common, and more affordable. And I'm going to put a link to that TED Talk in our chat box a little bit later. But that is using like frames or shelves to grow some of your food in small urban spaces, like on a patio or on a balcony, or even inside your home in some cases. Or regenerative agriculture also has to do with reducing organic waste that goes to the landfill. So that might be our food scraps, our yard waste. So every time we send organic waste to the landfill, instead of reusing it, it goes to the landfill and it produces methane gas as it rots, which again is a very, very powerful toxic greenhouse gas. So instead of sending organic waste to the landfill, we can use it in compost bins. We can use it in worm bins or worm boxes. We can send it to chicken coops where chickens eat the food scraps, the yard waste, and then the chickens, their poop can also go into compost piles and become part of compost that goes onto your garden beds to make them healthy. So next slide, please. So this is a picture of one of our compost bins. It's just a simple little compost system that we do at a lot of our gardens. And we invite people from the community to come and bring their food scraps and contribute to the compost system. And we post signs so that they'll know what's acceptable and what is really not good for our compost system. And it's just a reminder to people. So over the past year, we have composted a lot of food scraps. So again, some practical practices to keep in mind if we want to reduce our carbon footprint is to eat local food. So when we eat local food, we are not eating food type substances that are packaged in plastic and being transported all over the world. All of those things, contribute to our carbon footprint on the planet. Eating less meat, which we talked about, planting a garden at home or at church, sharing the fresh produce, and composting, which we've talked about. So next slide, please. So here is a family at one of our gardens. And so what can I do at home to reduce my carbon footprint? Reducing your lawn is one thing. So if you reduce the lawn that you have to mow and water and add more beds, then you can grow vegetables or you can grow pollinators, which attract bees and butterflies. And keeping in mind to plant native fruit-bearing trees, which I know Shelley's going to talk a lot more about later. So next slide, please. So what can we do at church? The same things that we do at home, which is all of the things that we do at home in terms of growing things in garden beds, but you can also start a community garden and you can include in that a compost system. So this is one of our student volunteers working at one of our community gardens. So next slide, please. This is a compost system that is at a garden on the campus of the University of Central Arkansas. So these compost systems can be not only at church gardens, but also at local colleges, local schools, at the library, at a community center. It's just places where people can take their food scraps or their yard waste instead of putting it all in the bags that go to the landfill. Next slide, please. So here are several pictures from several of our gardens. Again, gardens can be almost anywhere. They can be at church, community center, a library, homeless shelter, a school, a college campus. The picture in the lower left corner was taken at an Earth Day event at a place called Community of Hope Outreach, COHO, which is in Conway, Arkansas. So again, people are transitioning out of homelessness into tiny homes and taking advantage of the services that are offered there. And we have some gardens there where people can grow some of their own food. There are also some pollinators there. And they also have on site a food market that has donated food as well as some fresh produce from the gardens. So people can go there and they use fake money called Coho bucks so they can shop for what it is that they want to take home as groceries. So it's a more dignified way for people who are taking advantage of food ministries. There's a little bit of information up in the upper right-hand corner about our first year under this USDA grant. We've impacted nearly 16,000 of our neighbors. Nearly 30,000 pounds of produce have been diverted from the landfill to food pantries and compost systems. 58 interns and students have been involved working with 26 small farmers, master gardeners, professors, and mentors. And chicken coops, greenhouses, worm boxes, hydroponic systems, irrigation systems, and food pantries have been demonstrated and installed in 13 low wealth locations. So this is just an example of things that anybody can do in their community. So next slide, please. So these are some of the resources that I used to provide these slides for you all this evening. Now on the left, this is one of our high school students that is an intern. His name is Zeke, and he is demonstrating a way that almost everybody can have a worm bin at their garden, either at their church, at their home, at their community center, at their school campus, wherever. And these buckets are a way that people can do worm bins without spending a lot of money. It doesn't require a whole lot of resources. And so a worm bin, when you put food scraps in the worm bin, there's a 2-bucket process, maybe 3 buckets involved, I'm not sure. But he explains it much better than I can. But the worms, they eat 1.5 times their own weight in food waste every day, and you end up with very rich compost that can go on your garden beds. So please ignore all the cigarettes on the ground there. Those did not come from Zeke or anybody with our organization. There are some employees at a fast food restaurant across the street who come over to our garden at our church for lunch. And I think that's where all those cigarettes came from. But anyway, Zeke is one of our experts. I don't know if he's on the call tonight, but I know that some of our interns and some of our student volunteers are on the call. So when we get to the question and answer period, they're probably going to correct a lot of things that I just told you. But anyway, next slide, please. So again, why do we as people of faith care about environmental justice and our impact on the planet? We know that low-income people of color are most impacted by unhealthy diets, drought, dirty water, and dirty air, things that are the result of our huge carbon footprint on the planet. And when we can equalize things and make it more just, then we think that that is what we are called to do as people of faith. Next slide, please. So here are some pictures from some of our gardens. In central Arkansas, and people just hanging out in gardens and having a good time and growing food and learning a lot about regenerative agriculture. And again, we know that food justice is related to environmental justice, which is related to social justice, which certainly is related to peace. And the scriptures remind us that the fruit of justice will be peace. Next slide. And again, here are just a few pictures. The one on the left, this is a hydroponic system that a class, actually a group of classes, and the Green Bear Coalition at the University of Central Arkansas, they built this from parts that they collected. And some of our interns helped with a demonstration of that one day, but it's mobile, it's portable. So they built it so that it fits through a doorway so that they can move it inside or outside depending on the weather. So the students learn to build it. We put all of the components and all of the process on our website so that other people can follow that process. And hydroponics again is a way to grow not just lettuce and kale, but a lot of different things in water instead of soil. And it's a very popular method of growing food right now. And then the next picture, these are some of the children, not the next slide. Sorry, can you go back just one? Yeah, the next picture is some of the children at the Community of Hope Outreach. They're inside one of the small greenhouses that we demonstrated on site and left there for them. It's tall enough for an adult to stand up in, and it provides them with a way to start their spring growing early, which allows them to produce more food if they can extend their growing season. So our interns and our volunteers and our small farmers have been learning how to build the frames for these greenhouses, and it's the same frame that we use for a chicken coop. And then the next picture is one of our little food pantries that's on site at one of our gardens. It has a little solar panel on top, which provides lighting for the food pantry. So it lights up at night. And when someone comes and opens up the door, the light gets brighter. So you can see it looks pretty empty right now. I mean, we fill that thing all the time. People bring donated food, but we also put some of the fresh produce from our garden in there, and people take that immediately. And when we think about it, we put in low budget recipes that they can use, so they'll know what do I do with the potato, what do I do with the turnip, you know, those, what do I do with these carrots. So that we try to have a way of distributing food at all of the college campuses that we work with and several of our community gardens. So we know that Arkansas is one of the highest, one of the states with the highest rate of food insecurity, but there's food insecurity everywhere with the price of groceries right now. And then the next slide is a child who has been collecting eggs from a chicken. So that's it. Yeah, so go ahead to the next slide. Thanks. So next, Shelley Barrett Parsons is with us, and she's going to talk specifically about trees and how they're part of resilient communities. She is the executive director of Capital Trees in Richmond, Virginia. She has a PhD and a master's in Christian education, a master of divinity from Union Theological Seminary. She spent many years serving in pastoral roles and in nonprofit leadership. She has earned the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professional Level 1 certification, and she has been working on building greener and more livable cities through increasing public landscapes and tree canopies. So I'm happy to introduce to you Shelley. Thank you so much. I'll look at the questions in the chat and we'll get back to that later.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Get to the slide. For some reason it's not showing the slideshow button, so sorry. Oh, there it is. All right, we're ready to go. So yeah, I'm Shelley Barrick Parsons. I live in Richmond, Virginia, and serve as the executive director for Capital Trees, which is an urban greening nonprofit focused in Richmond. And our goal is to build a greener and more livable Richmond. We do that primarily through increasing tree canopy, building public landscapes, and just as important as all of that is sustainable management of our completed projects, both financially and environmentally. I think just to get the conversation started and the presentation, it's important to think about what are the benefits of trees. This may be obvious to most of us on the call, but I think it's important to remind ourselves of why it matters even to focus on trees as church people when there's so many other needs in the community. Why should we think about the benefits of trees? And there's, three main benefits. They build climate resilience, improve health, and create community. So we'll talk a little bit more about this when we talk about environmental justice, but trees do reduce the impacts of urban heat island, improve air quality, rebuild habitat and increase biodiversity, mitigate the impacts of floodwaters, both by slowing the flow of water and filtering water off of hardscapes, through their root system and their ability to help make the soil more permeable. They support wildlife and same as the other, improve soil quality and reduce erosion. So they really, when we're looking at some of the issues we face with climate change, do help to build climate resilient communities. We also know, and science is more and more backing this up, that trees, having access to trees, whether that's just looking at trees from a window, being able to walk into a tree-lined street, to sit among trees, has benefits for our mental and physical health. Spending time outside can lead to a decreased heart rate, decreased blood pressure, and cortisol levels. Getting outside 90 minutes twice a week showed enhanced visual processing speed, attention, and cortisol levels, and reduced burnout systems. And this was anything from taking a walk to doing outdoor tasks like filling bird feeders or building bird feeders. And I think one thing to think about when we look at children and youth too is that really being outside, being in nature, being around trees should be integral to our education because it does improve focus, processing, attention. It has benefits. And just some other things, people who are in hospitals and have access to be able to see trees from their hospital window tend to heal and be discharged faster and need less pain medicine. So trees do help improve our well-being. Probably for me, really, I got into Capital Trees because I thought it would make a tangible difference in the community by planting trees and improving and building climate resilient communities. But the more I've learned, the more that I really am drawn to this work is because of the way it builds stronger communities and helps to foster community identity and cohesion. So this quote is from a University of Vermont study that showed that people, when they're in urban parks, places with trees, and they tweet, they make happier, less self-centered tweets. And those impacts of being around trees and green space last beyond the experience. I can't think of something that we don't need more of right now, which is improved moods and more selflessness. And so that's one thing trees provide. They have spiritual connections for us. They help remind us that we are connected to something larger, help us to be more mindful and more compassionate towards our surroundings. And just back to this one, I think also trees and green spaces help to create community identity and connection because trees and grass and community spaces and the use of those help to draw people out. They bring them out of their homes, bring them out of their houses, and helps to build relationships between neighbors. So having intentional tree plantings available helps to draw people together. So again, we know that trees build strong, connected communities, climate resilient communities, and healthier communities. So there are many benefits to trees. However, we know today that tree canopies, particularly in urban context, sort of your percent of tree canopy directly correlates with historic practices of redlining and disinvestment. So higher graded non-redline neighborhoods to this day have more tree canopy and honestly better green space than lower redlined neighborhoods. So if you believe that trees do build climate resilient, cohesive, and connected communities that are healthy, then there's a major justice issue when we look at tree canopy, particularly in the urban environment, and where many communities lack tree canopy. And this has been particularly prevalent in Richmond, Virginia. I think some of the leading research about redlining and heat islands and disinvestment has come out of Richmond. But you can see here from redlining Richmond, the direct targeting, disinvestment, and destruction of important Black neighborhoods has led to adverse effects on these communities and the people who lived there. So that was in the past. But to this day, redline neighborhoods are more likely to have higher concentrations of Black residents, higher health risks, lower incomes, higher temperatures, less tree cover, and lower home values. So there is a correlation between tree canopy, redlining, and continued historic disinvestment issues. And this is a map from Richmond, Virginia. If you're not familiar with redlining, it was a historic practice where banks went in and identified neighborhoods that were the best value to invest in versus the worst value to invest in, A, B, C, or D. And these here on the side-by-side map of Richmond, you can see in red on the left side are the neighborhoods that were redlined. These were considered not neighborhoods worthy of having loans or being invested in. And historically, those were historically Black neighborhoods to begin with. And so they did not get the same level of investment through loans and home ownership and care over time. And if you look at these two maps side by side, you can see in the redlined areas, significantly less tree canopy. And then on the right-hand screen, that's a heat map. Richmond, we did this in 2021. We drove around with sensors on our car measuring air quality and heat. We did it 3 times a day, 6 o'clock in the morning, mid-afternoon, and 7 o'clock in the evening to track the heat levels. And this is showing some of that thermal imaging of heat. And you can see a correlation in afternoon temperatures that are higher and more excessive in areas that were redlined without tree canopy. And so again, what does that look like? It looks like lack of adequate green space and infrastructure, more built environment. You're going to get more roads, sidewalks, houses, and less green infrastructure. It means it's hotter, the air quality is poorer, and those areas are flood prone. Just some percentage examples. Redline neighborhoods tend to have up to 30% less tree canopy. What that means in terms of the urban heat island effect is they do not have the benefit of trees providing 2 methods for cooling. One is with shade, and another is through the evaporation, evapotranspiration process a tree does, that when it breathes out, it's also releasing water molecules into the air, which also has a cooling impact. But when you lack those trees, it means your sidewalks, your streets, your home, all absorb the daytime heat and then release that again in the night. So it's not just that it's significantly hotter in the afternoon, it remains hotter in the evening. That's what an urban heat island is. You can see the maps here. The lack of trees coupled with other issues leads to chronic illness such as asthma. And in these maps in the summer, you'll see a higher heat-related emergencies are higher in these urban heat island areas. Utility costs are higher, and there's more likelihood of flash flooding because of lack of green infrastructure to absorb floodwaters and slow the flow. But there is an answer. Trees are a scalable and affordable solution to this environmental justice issue. And so here are for you all as individuals and as communities of faith, some of the community-based solutions that include collaborate, advocate, replant, prioritize, provide, manage, and draw in. So the first one that I think I would jump up and down and say is collaborate. That as we learn about how to be in ministry together in communities, particularly communities that have been historically disinvested and neglected, our job, if we are predominantly white, affluent, and resource heavy, is not to go in and say, well, we've come to plant some trees in your neighborhood. You definitely want them. Really, it's to start first with collaboration, to be community focused, led, and driven. So that means taking time to get to know even the community surrounding your church, depending on where it is, the community that has a lower tree canopy percentage, and really get to know them and their needs and what they're interested in, who the leaders are. Learn and meet and listen and engage and partner with neighborhoods impacted, partner with the community, and often partner with a community-based nonprofit or another nonprofit that is doing this kind of work already. So just the collaborative nature is just so important to how we enter into spaces. And then advocate. I think one of the things people of faith can do as communities and individuals is advocate for tree friendly practices, not just tree planting practices, but tree friendly practices that prioritize retaining trees and tree canopy before, during, and after development. That this is something you can be advocating for at a city, state, and national level. And really understanding your own city and state government to understand if you can even enact a city law without it being a state law. So I know in Virginia has to go through the state legislature in order for it to be done within the city. And we are working hard to try to prioritize existing trees in development, because planting trees is really important and certainly what drives Capitol Trees, but taking down a large established tree, it'll be decades before you get the ecosystem benefits back of a tree that could have been saved in development. And then prioritize, under this advocate is prioritize getting trees in the hands of those who actually need them. So there's two things to that. One, American Forest, I think I have that link in there, has a tree equity index. So you can go to your community and you can find the places with low tree canopy cover. You can drive around and see them too. So that's one thing, being able to prioritize with tree giveaways, with partner organizations, all of that, places that really need trees. But second to that, back to that collaborate, is how important it is to teach people how to access the trees. So we're talking about an adopted tree program here in Richmond. And if it's an application-based program, notoriously well-resourced neighborhoods do better at these kind of application-based programs. The same with our 311 programs to notice where street trees are missing. That is a privilege and a skill. So being able to help folks who do not know how to work through a political system, who do not know how to work through the 311 system, any of that, it's really important to help prioritize getting trees in the hands of the people who cannot afford them, who do not know how to ask for them always, or how to work the system to get them. So I think that's an important thing we can do as partners with communities. And then, of course, replanting, and Charmel mentioned this, that replanting with native trees is really important, looking at what's native to your area. And two things about that, looking at what's native to your area and what will work in the space provided. And then even depending on climate change, and this is varying, people have varying opinions, but like when we were at City Parks Alliance this summer, some folks, when they're prioritizing planting and native selection, look at something that is native in their location, but then native in the next zone down, or a zone that it appears that our ecosystem is moving to. So for us, so like when we were in Seattle, this particular park was looking at a zone that was hotter and wetter because it did look like where they were headed was hotter or wetter. So planting native trees that will thrive over time. For us, some of the places we look for tree selection help are to our Department of Forestry. I can't say enough good things about the Virginia Department of Forestry. Your forestry programs at your land grant institutions, colleges, and universities. If your municipality has an Office of Sustainability, they likely have resources about tree planting. Provide. So this is another one. I think that churches in many places are untapped resources. You can provide tree canopy on your church property. So you can plant on the church site. The Trust for Public Land wants every person to have a 10-minute safe walk or access to a public landscape. By planting even a small area of trees with somewhere to sit, you can become that public landscape, that 10-minute walk destination. And I think we think a lot about getting people inside the church walls, but the church property is also an opportunity for places for someone to gather, for people to gather together, to build community, to work on health and well-being. Just think about what your church property has to offer the community in terms of tree canopy in place. And then you can sponsor tree giveaways. Like I said, there's nonprofits that are often looking for a parking lot to have a tree giveaway in, or help connecting with neighbors to give away trees. And I would say this about tree, and you saw it in all the slides that we've showed today. People want to get out and get their hands dirty and do something that's tangible, whether it's weeding, gardening, planting trees. And for some people, that's the door into larger conversations about environmental issues, like around greenhouse gas emissions, around other practices, around looking at a plant-based diet and reducing your carbon footprint through other ways. And so I think that's the other important thing, particularly post-COVID, about the outdoor activities of gardening, tending a garden, and planting trees, is it's a way for some people to really get their foot in the door to learn about greater environmental justice issues. And people are really looking for places to be out in community and together. So again, thank you. I'm glad to be here tonight, glad to take any questions, and thank you for your time.
Thanks a lot. I've been trying to keep up with the questions in the chat. So here's one for you, Shelley, from Barb Brown. Do you know if the Arbor Day Foundation has done any planting in Richmond? The Arbor Day Foundation.
I don't know off the top of my head if they have done any planting in Richmond or any granting. Yeah.
Okay, we also had a question from June about how does Arkansas Interfaith Power and Light count all the food waste that we've diverted from the landfill? That's a good question. So I know Marthella is on the webinar tonight, and she knows very well that every time we do something, we put it on the spreadsheet and we put a number beside it. So that's the way that we keep up with it, because our funders expect that from us. We made a certain commitment, that we would build a certain number of gardens, a certain number of chicken coops, a certain number of greenhouses, and a certain number of compost systems, irrigation, all that kind of stuff. So every time we do it, and we don't call it building it or doing it, we call it demonstrating it, because we do it with the people who live there or go to church there. We do it with them, so they learn how to do it. So we call it a demonstration, and we leave it there for them to use. Does that make sense? So that was a lot of compost. That was a pretty high number when you saw all those thousands of pounds of compost that we've diverted from the landfill. But so every time that we turn compost, or we take Marthella, I know, goes and picks up coffee grounds from a lot of restaurants and takes them to some of our compost systems. And we also try to calculate on our own at our compost systems in all of our gardens. But one of the things that really got that number up so high was on one day, one project, some of our interns in Little Rock went to the Little Rock Zoo, and they got 20,000 pounds of elephant poop. And so they took it to one of our nearby gardens, and it's there in a pile. And so over a year, the interns and the students are going to be turning that. And then they'll test it to make sure that it's safe to put on our garden beds. So it was like 4 trailer loads, those trailers that you pull behind your pickup trucks or whatever. So the reason that elephant poo can be possibly good for your gardens is because elephants don't eat meat. So any animal, this is what I'm told. Again, I'm not a scientist. I just pay the bills. But they tell me that any animal that does not eat meat, their waste can be a part of your soil, your rich soil that eventually goes on your garden bed. So elephants qualify for that. So dogs and cats don't, but chickens do, and there are a variety of animals that do. So the zoo has a huge problem about what to do with their elephant waste and other animal waste. So anybody who wants any animal waste, I bet you could go to your local zoo and they would gladly give it to you for free. And then you would end up maybe with some rich soil. Again, I think you need to test it before you put it on your garden beds. But we have people involved who we work with our county extension services in both Conway and Little Rock, Faulkner County and Pulaski County, to do soil testing to make sure that we're not putting something on our garden beds that would be harmful, that is something that would be nutritious and has the right chemical balance. We also had a question from Jim about how is composting at the composting waste at our composting site not also adding methane emissions just like they do at the landfill? And I'm going to tell you that I'm not sure I know the answer to that. And I'm hoping that somebody on our webinar tonight, maybe one of our interns or maybe our garden manager, somebody knows more about this than I do. I think it has to do with the fact that at our compost systems, the interns and the students, they're constantly turning that compost so it becomes rich soil rather than just at the landfill, nobody's turning it and it just rots and produces methane gas. It may produce some methane gas at our compost systems, but at least in the end, it's used for a beneficial purpose. Now, if somebody knows more about that than I do, just jump right in, because I'm not a biologist or a chemist. So anybody else is welcome to take on that question.
Okay, so I'm neither a biologist or a chemist either. But I think the difference in composting at a garden and composting at a landfill is that it's not a lot of additional waste. So in a landfill, you have some plastics, you have food waste that meats and other things that can contribute to that methane gas that's coming up. It's like so much more stuff, like what's in the trash can versus what you would put in a garden compost. So you want to stay organic. So you don't put like meat waste, like steak bones and, animal carcasses and different things like that in that compost. So, just thinking, yeah, go ahead.
June has something, and she has her hand raised, and we also have a comment here from Nelson, who says the methane gas is generated in a low, no oxygen environment. As long as you're turning the compost, you add oxygen and don't get methane produced. Oh, well, that's great to know. Thank you, Nelson. Did you want to add to that, June? No,
that was what I was going to say.
Okay, wonderful. Let me see if there's another question. Okay.
Wait, hold on. Melissa Couch had her hand up.
Oh,
I'll add a little bit to that. When
Okay.
when you are composting, it stays in the upper top inches of the soil where all the worms and other bacteria live and grow. So it's actually turning over before it's been contained in a pressure of burying it in a landfill kind of thing.
Great answer. Thank you, Melissa. We have I see Bruce's hand up. Bruce is next. First, Barb Brown has a question that's been waiting. Can worm bins be kept active during a cold, snowy winter? What do you do with the results in the winter? I don't think so. But again, somebody who knows more about worm boxes and worm bins can answer that question. But I think they need to be kept at a temperature a lot like we like the temperature. So it can't be too hot or it can't be too cold, or the worms won't survive if you want them to be doing their job, which is eating your food waste. So Melissa seems to be agreeing with that. So Melissa, you want to chime in?
Yes, there's one other thing. When the red buckets that was being referred to at one of the things, and he was saying that's for worm. You can actually you can do all your composting in your kitchen with worms and newspaper, and that's it. And they're very happy in that environment also. But during the winter, they don't eat much. So
Oh,
so if you're doing it inside your home, I've heard of people who do this under their kitchen sink, and
Yeah.
it makes this rich gold for your garden when
I
you're ready
think
to
that's,
plant.
I think that's what our garden manager does. Okay, Bruce has his hand up. Hi, Bruce. Did you join us late? I didn't see you at the very beginning.
I was talking to a stated clerk about PEC and couldn't get on as quickly as I wanted.
Well,
Um,
welcome. We're glad you're here.
I did catch the end of your presentation and all of Shelley's, and I'm so grateful that both of you are doing this. I just wanted to remind folks that we have an entire program on composting with Daniela from a recent PEC conference. The video is online, and there are links to all kinds of additional information on composting. I think churches should be modeling it with the coffee hours and everything else they do, having compost. And let's get everybody doing it. We're doing it here. But I'm just thrilled with what you guys are doing here. So thank you very, very much.
Well, thanks, Bruce. I appreciate all that. That's a great idea. Everybody do something. Where we heard that recently. Everybody do something. Okay, Jen says that they are special worms, non-native, not from your local garden. Oh, well, I don't know. I think we've just been to we just went to the fishing department of Walmart and got our worms. So I don't know. Are there other better worms? Okay, Melissa has something to add.
I'm not going to be that picky about worms. They probably know a lot more than I do, but mine I cultivated after a rain, and they're kind of washed into the gutter. And I picked them up and brought them home and stuck them in my pile, and they've been growing ever since.
Okay. So are they in a bucket or in your compost pile?
I have a one of those black composters, and the reason for that is that it keeps it hotter, but it's not as easy. If you have the space where they have the three next to each other and you just transfer it over, that is the best soil you're going to get. But I just feel like I'm feeding my worms, and they're very happy, and I'm proud mommy.
Okay. Are there other questions or things you want to add? I know that we covered a lot of information. So some of you who, do a lot in the garden or have some info or do a lot with trees or let's see, we have something else from Bruce. Compost Matters. He's put a link in the chat about where we can learn more about composting and the benefits of composting. I put a link in the chat earlier about that TED Talk that I heard today that I told you about that was about vertical gardening. I thought it was very interesting. It was just a 12-minute podcast. And it's about how vertical gardening is no longer just for lettuce and kale, and spinach. This guy was doing it with strawberries, and he started off very, very small, but now has a big, operation for growing strawberries in a vertical gardening system. So, with that kind of a system, you could have strawberries year round if you're doing it inside and you've got the right lighting and the right conditions. So, yeah, others. Yeah, Bruce has something else.
Quick question for Shelley. Shelley, I continue to be amazed by the work you're doing in Richmond. Have you been able to get the Union Presbyterian Seminary involved?
Not directly with me, no. I mean, I think they're working with maybe Virginia Interfaith Power and Light on a conference coming up in October, a faith and green space conference, and then they have their land sharing partnership with Shalom Farms, and hopefully Yaupon Place will be back on. So I'm just kind of on the side, had conversations with them, but yeah, not done anything directly with them recently. I was working with Yaupon Place, and then it's been on hold and hopefully coming back soon.
I will share this webinar with the president.
That's a great idea.
If
Yeah.
she's not aware of the history of redlining, I think she should know about that. You did a quick, wonderful overview on that. So thank you.
Oh, I'd hope so, because it's pretty I mean, I say that, but part of the reason I did to be honest, part of the reason I shared it in this presentation is because it's the water I swim in with work now. I think everybody knows it. And then I just am surprised sometimes that maybe that's not something that everybody's aware of. But in Richmond, it's a pretty big deal because Jeremy Hoffman wrote that New York Times article. He works for Groundwork USA now, used to work for the Science Museum of Virginia. This is just a side conversation. The Science Museum of Virginia, based on Jeremy's work around heat islands and green space, pulled up an entire parking lot, shrunk it into a parking deck between two buildings, and has taken the whole front, basically, I'd say at least 2 city blocks, and built green space because they took so seriously the importance of green space and trees in an urban environment. And this is in Scott's Addition, which has become completely well developed without trees. So yeah, like I said, it's because of what I do every day. I assume everybody knows that, but maybe not.
Good to know. Yeah. Anybody else have a comment or a question? Just so you know, I mean, this has been recorded, so you can watch it later, and anybody can watch it later on our website. And the slide shows will be available, and we'll also send everybody like a 1-page summary of the points that we made. So there's nothing. We don't
I
want
have
to
a
keep
couple
this a secret
slides
at
to
all.
share while people are thinking if they have any more questions, if you want, Charlotte.
Yeah,
Some
do it. Go.
slides, okay.
Oh yeah.
This, so I can do the slideshow here. We have our next, well, kind of ongoing event we have going on right now. I'm trying to get my slideshow started and my cursor has disappeared. There it is. We have started an online study. The Presbyterian Women's Bible study for the year is on Patricia Tull's Let Justice Roll Down, God's Call to Care for Neighbors and All Creation. It's about creation care. And so that's just started this past Sunday. We're doing the 4th Sunday of every month. It's free. All you have to do is go to the link when it's time for your time zone. And it's a 75-minute study. It's being led by 2 Presbyterians for Earth Care members. And so the authors are actually going to make an in-person appearance at those as well. So the next one's in October. And